The blizzard came down from the Sierra Nevada with a fury that turned the world white, and Stella Owens knew with absolute certainty that she would die if she did not find shelter within the next hour. She had been traveling alone from Carson City to Goldfield, Nevada, a foolish decision in December of 1887. But desperation had a way of making fools of even the most sensible people. Her father had died 3 months prior, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises, and the boarding house where she had worked for 2 years had burned to the ground just weeks after his funeral. The owner of the establishment, a woman named Mrs. Hutchins, who had always treated Stella with kindness, had pressed $20 into her palm and told her about a teaching position in Goldfield, a mining town that was beginning to flourish with the recent silver strikes. It was not much, but it was a chance at a new life, and Stella had taken it without hesitation. The stagecoach had made it halfway through the journey before one of the horses went lame, and the driver, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, had informed the passengers that they would need to wait at a way station until a replacement could be brought from the nearest town. Stella had waited for 2 days in that cramped, cold building with 3 other travelers, watching the sky grow darker and more ominous with each passing hour. When the driver finally announced that no replacement was coming and that they would all need to make their own arrangements, panic had set in among the group. One of the other passengers, a merchant heading to Tonopah, had offered to let Stella ride with him in his wagon, but when they were still miles from Goldfield, his horse had spooked at something in the gathering storm and bolted, overturning the wagon and breaking the merchant's leg in 3 places. Stella had done what she could to make him comfortable, covering him with every blanket they had and promising to send help, but she knew that if she stayed with him, they would both freeze to death before morning. So she had walked, clutching her small carpet bag and the thin wool coat that was wholly inadequate for this kind of weather, praying that she would see some sign of civilization before the cold claimed her. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, and her feet were not far behind. The snow was so thick that she could barely see 5 feet in front of her, and the wind howled like a living thing, pushing against her with such force that each step forward felt like a battle. Then, through the white curtain of snow, she saw it. A light. Faint and flickering, but unmistakably real. A cabin, set back from what must have been the road, smoke rising from its chimney in a gray plume that was quickly swallowed by the storm. Stella stumbled toward it, her legs shaking with exhaustion and cold, and when she finally reached the wooden door, she raised her fist and pounded against it with the last of her strength. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the wind and the snow and the terrible cold that was seeping into her bones. Then the door opened, and warmth flooded out, along with the smell of wood smoke and coffee. A man stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a simple flannel shirt and denim trousers, and for a moment he just stared at her, taking in her snow-covered form and trembling limbs. "Please," Stella managed to say, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "I need shelter, just until the storm passes." The man did not hesitate. He reached out, wrapped one strong arm around her waist and pulled her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The sudden warmth was almost painful against her frozen skin, and Stella's legs gave out. She would have fallen if the man had not been holding her, and he swept her up into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all, carrying her to a chair near the fireplace. "Jesus Christ, you are half frozen," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through her chest. "How long were you out there?" "I do not know," Stella admitted, her voice weak. "Hours, The wagon overturned. There is a man, a merchant, he broke his leg, miles back, he needs help. The man's jaw tightened. In this storm, I cannot get to him until morning, but I will go at first light, I promise you that. Right now, I need to make sure you do not lose any fingers or toes to frostbite. He moved with quick efficiency, pulling off her sodden coat and boots, then wrapping her in a thick wool blanket that had been warming by the fire. Her feet were pale and waxy looking, and when he touched them, she hissed in pain. "That is good," he said, glancing up at her. "If you can feel it, that means there is still blood flow. I am going to warm them slowly. It is going to hurt like hell, but you need to bear it." Stella nodded, biting her lip as he began to rub her feet gently between his large, calloused hands. He was right. It did hurt. It felt like 1,000 needles were being driven into her skin, and she had to grip the arms of the chair to keep from crying out. But she did not pull away, because she understood that this pain was necessary, that it meant she would keep her feet. "What is your name?" the man asked, his voice gentle now, clearly trying to distract her from the discomfort. "Stella," she said through gritted teeth. "Stella Owens." "Stella," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I am Cole Everett. This is my cabin, such as it is. Not much to look at, but it keeps the cold out." Stella looked around the space for the first time, taking in the simple but well-built interior. It was one large room, with a sleeping area in one corner separated by a curtain, a small kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and a table with 2 chairs near the window. Everything was neat and orderly, the mark of a man who lived alone and had learned to take care of himself. There were books on a shelf near the bed and a rifle mounted above the door. The fire crackled cheerfully in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "It is beautiful," Stella said honestly, "and warm. That is all that matters right now." Cole's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile, but he focused his attention back on her feet, working the blood back into them with patient, steady movements. When he was satisfied that they were no longer in danger, he moved to her hands, repeating the process. By the time he was done, Stella was exhausted, the pain and the warmth and the sheer relief of being alive combining to make her feel like she could sleep for a week. "When did you last eat?" Cole asked, standing and moving to the stove. "Yesterday morning," Stella admitted. There was not much food at the way station. Cole made a disapproving sound in the back of his throat and began pulling things from the cupboard. Within minutes, he had a pot of stew heating on the stove, and the smell of it made Stella's stomach clench with hunger. He ladled a generous portion into a bowl and brought it to her, along with a thick slice of bread and a cup of hot coffee. "Eat slowly," he instructed. "Your stomach is going to be angry if you rush it." Stella nodded and took a small spoonful of the stew. It was simple fare, just beef and vegetables in a rich broth, but it tasted like the finest meal she had ever eaten. She forced herself to eat slowly, savoring each bite while Cole sat down across from her with his own bowl. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind outside. Stella watched Cole from beneath her lashes, trying to get a sense of the man who had saved her life. He was handsome, she realized, in a rough, weathered way. His face was all hard angles and strong lines, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite and a nose that had clearly been broken at least once. There was a scar running through his left eyebrow, and his hands were marked with the calluses and scars of hard work. But his eyes, when they met hers, were kind. "You said you were heading to Goldfield," Cole said after a while. "What business do you have there?" "I am supposed to start a teaching position at the school," Stella explained. "Or I was, at least. I was meant to arrive 3 days ago. They have probably given the job to someone else by now." "Maybe," Cole said. Or maybe they will understand that you got caught in the storm. It happens out here. People know the land can be unforgiving. Do you live here alone? Stella asked, then immediately felt her cheeks heat. I apologize. That was rude of me to ask. Not rude, Cole said easily. And yes, I do. I have a small ranch about a mile from here. Cattle, mostly. This is my winter cabin. I stay here during the cold months so I can keep an eye on the herd without having to ride back and forth to the main house every day. That sounds like a lonely life, Stella said softly. Cole shrugged. I suppose it is. But I prefer it to being around people most of the time. People are complicated. Cattle are simple. There was a story there, Stella sensed, some pain or disappointment that had driven Cole to seek solitude. But she did not press, because she barely knew this man and she had no right to his secrets. Instead, she finished her stew and set the bowl aside, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. You can take the bed, Cole said, as if reading her thoughts. I will sleep by the fire. I cannot take your bed, Stella protested. You have already done so much. You can and you will, Cole said firmly. You have been through hell today and you need proper rest. I have slept in worse places than in front of a fire, believe me. Stella wanted to argue, but the truth was that she was too tired to put up much of a fight. She nodded gratefully and stood, swaying slightly on her feet. Cole was there in an instant, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. Easy, he said. You are still weak. He guided her to the bed, which was tucked behind a faded blue curtain. It was a simple rope bed with a straw mattress, but it looked like heaven to Stella. She sank down onto it, still wrapped in the blanket, and Cole pulled a thick quilt over her. Thank you, she whispered, her eyes already closing, for everything. Get some rest, Cole said quietly. We will figure everything else out in the morning. Stella wanted to stay awake, to make sure that Cole was comfortable, to think about what she was going to do next, but her body had other ideas. Within moments, she was asleep, dreamless and deep. She woke to the sound of the door closing and the cold rush of air that came with it. Stella sat up quickly, momentarily disoriented, before remembering where she was. Pale morning light was filtering through the window, and the storm had finally passed. Cole was pulling on a heavy coat, his expression grim. The merchant, Stella said, throwing back the quilt. You are going to find him. I am, Cole confirmed. With any luck, he survived the night. Stay here, keep the fire going, and do not go outside. The snow is deep, and I do not want you getting lost. Be careful, Stella said, and Cole nodded before slipping out the door. The hours that followed were some of the longest of Stella's life. She kept herself busy, feeding the fire and tidying the cabin, but her mind kept returning to the merchant lying out there in the cold, and to Cole riding out into the snow to find him. What if something happened to him? What if he got lost, or his horse threw him, or any of 100 other disasters that could befall a man in this unforgiving landscape? It was nearly noon when the door finally opened again, and Cole stumbled inside, his face red from the cold and his expression weary. Behind him, 2 other men were carrying a makeshift stretcher, and on it was the merchant, alive but barely conscious. Is he going to be all right? Stella asked, rushing forward. Doc Harrison will take care of him, one of the other men said. He was older, with a salt and pepper beard and kind eyes. We are taking him into Goldfield now. You must be the young lady Cole told us about. Miss Owens, is it? Yes, Stella said, nodding. Is Goldfield far? About 3 miles, the man said. You can ride with us if you like. I am sure they are wondering what happened to you at the school. Stella glanced at Cole, who was stripping off his wet coat and hanging it by the fire. He did not look at her, and she felt a strange pang of something she could not quite name. Reluctance, perhaps. The idea of leaving this cabin, of leaving Cole, felt wrong somehow, even though she had only known him for a handful of hours. "I will get my things," she said quietly. Her carpetbag was where she had left it by the door, and her coat, though still damp, was wearable. As she gathered her belongings, Cole finally looked at her and something flickered in his gray eyes. Regret, maybe, or disappointment. "Thank you," Stella said, meeting his gaze. "For saving my life. I will never forget what you did for me." "You do not need to thank me," Cole said gruffly. Any decent person would have done the same. But Stella knew that was not true. There were plenty of people who would have turned her away, who would have decided that the risk was not worth the trouble. Cole had not hesitated, and that meant something. "Still," she said softly, "thank you." Cole nodded once, a sharp jerk of his head, and then Stella was being ushered out the door by the older man, whose name she learned was Frank Ellsworth. They loaded her into a wagon alongside the injured merchant, and as they began the slow journey toward Goldfield, Stella turned to look back at the cabin. Cole was standing in the doorway, watching them leave, and even from a distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze. Goldfield was larger than Stella had expected. A bustling mining town with a main street lined with shops and saloons, and people hurrying about their business despite the fresh snow on the ground. Frank took her directly to the schoolhouse, a small wooden building at the edge of town, where she was greeted by a stern-looking woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Miss Owens," the woman said, her tone clipped. "I am Mrs. Beatrice Hartford, the head of the school board. We had expected you 3 days ago." "I apologize," Stella said, straightening her spine. "The stagecoach broke down and then I was caught in the storm. A man had to be rescued. It was beyond my control." Mrs. Hartford studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Yes, we heard about the merchant. Very well. You are here now, and that is what matters. The children have been without a teacher for 2 weeks and they are running wild. You will start tomorrow." Relief flooded through Stella and she nodded eagerly. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartford. I will not let you down." "See that you do not," Mrs. Hartford said. "Now you will be staying in the room behind the schoolhouse. It is not much, but it is clean and warm. Come, I will show you." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her belongings. But it had a window that looked out onto the mountains, and it was, as Mrs. Hartford had promised, clean and warm. Stella set her carpetbag down and sank onto the bed, suddenly aware of how exhausted she still was. That night, alone in her small room, Stella found herself thinking about Cole, about the way he had pulled her inside without hesitation, the gentleness with which he had warmed her frozen limbs, the quiet strength that seemed to emanate from him. She wondered if she would ever see him again, and the thought that she might not left a hollow ache in her chest that she could not quite explain. The next morning, Stella threw herself into her new role as teacher with determination. The schoolhouse held 23 children, ranging in age from 6 to 14, and they were, as Mrs. Hartford had warned, a lively bunch. But Stella had always loved children, and she quickly found her rhythm, establishing rules and routines while also making the lessons engaging enough to hold their attention. The days turned into weeks, and Stella settled into life in Goldfield. She made friends with some of the other women in town, including a young widow named Emma who ran the general store, and she attended church on Sundays, where she sang hymns and listened to the preacher talk about redemption and grace. It was a good life, a stable life, and Stella was grateful for it, but she could not stop thinking about Cole. She asked about him casually during conversations with Emma and the other townspeople. She learned that he was well respected, known for being honest and hardworking, if a bit solitary. He came into town once a month for supplies, they said, and he kept to himself. Some people found him standoffish, but others understood that he had simply been through things that made him wary of getting close to people. It was the middle of January when Stella saw him again. She was walking back from the general store, her arms full of supplies for the schoolhouse, when she nearly collided with a man coming out of the blacksmith shop. She stumbled, and strong hands caught her, steadying her, and when she looked up, she found herself staring into those familiar gray eyes. "Cole," she breathed, and a smile broke across her face before she could stop it. "Stella," he said, and there was something in his voice, some warmth that had not been there before. "You are still here." "Of course I am," she said, laughing. "Where else would I be?" "I do not know," Cole admitted. "I thought maybe you would have moved on, found somewhere better." "There is nowhere better," Stella said firmly. "I like it here. The children are wonderful and the town is kind. I am happy." Cole's expression softened, and he reached out to take some of the packages from her arms. "Let me help you with those." They walked together through the snowy streets, and Stella found herself chattering away, telling him about the school and the children and the funny things that had happened over the past few weeks. Cole listened, interjecting occasionally with a question or a quiet laugh, and by the time they reached the schoolhouse, Stella felt like they had known each other for years instead of weeks. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" she asked, suddenly not wanting him to leave. Cole hesitated, glancing at the sky. "I should get back. I still have a few more errands to run before I head out." "Just one cup," Stella pressed. "Please, I would like to thank you properly for everything you did." Cole looked at her for a long moment, and then he nodded. "One cup." Stella led him into the small room behind the schoolhouse, suddenly acutely aware of how cramped and plain it was. But if Cole noticed, he did not say anything. He simply sat down in the single chair while Stella busied herself making coffee on the small stove. They talked for over an hour, and Stella learned more about Cole in that time than she had from all the gossip in town. He told her about his ranch, about the cattle and the land and the solitude that he found comforting. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to a cholera outbreak when he was 16, about drifting west and eventually settling in Nevada. He did not talk about why he preferred to be alone, but Stella could sense the pain beneath his words, the wounds that had not quite healed. In turn, Stella told him about her own life, about her father and his gambling debts, about the boarding house fire and the long journey to Goldfield. She told him about her love of teaching, about the way the children's faces lit up when they finally understood a difficult concept, about her dreams of maybe one day opening a school of her own. When Cole finally stood to leave, the sun was already beginning to set, and there was a strange expression on his face, something between wonder and fear. "I should come by more often," he said, his voice rough. "To check on you, make sure you are settling in all right." "I would like that," Stella said softly. And he did. Over the next few weeks, Cole began coming into town more frequently, always finding some excuse to stop by the schoolhouse. Sometimes he brought firewood, other times fresh meat from a deer he had hunted, and once he arrived with a beautiful hand-carved wooden box that he said was for her to keep her letters in. Each visit lasted a little longer than the last, and each time Cole left, Stella found herself counting the days until she would see him again. It was Emma who finally said what Stella had been too afraid to admit to herself. They were having tea in the back room of the general store, and Emma was watching Stella with a knowing smile. "That rancher is sweet on you," Emma said bluntly. Stella felt her cheeks heat. "Cole, no, we are just friends." "Friends," Emma repeated, her tone skeptical. "Friends who look at each other like you two do? I do not think so, Stella. That man is falling in love with you if he has not already." "That is ridiculous," Stella protested, but her heart was racing. "He barely knows me." "Sometimes it does not take long," Emma said gently. Sometimes you just know. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Stella allowed herself to think about it, to think about Cole and the way her heart seemed to beat faster when he was near, to think about the gentleness in his hands and the rare smiles that transformed his stern face, to think about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was falling in love too. February brought a warm spell that melted much of the snow, and Cole invited Stella to come see his ranch. She accepted eagerly, borrowing a horse from Frank Ellsworth and riding out on a Saturday morning when the sun was bright and the air was crisp and clean. The ranch was beautiful, even more so than Stella had imagined. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure built from local timber, with a wide porch that overlooked the valley. There were corrals and outbuildings, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the winter grass. Cole showed her around with obvious pride, pointing out the improvements he had made and his plans for the future. "It is wonderful," Stella said honestly, standing on the porch and looking out at the land. "You have built something real here, Cole, something that will last." "It feels empty sometimes," Cole admitted, coming to stand beside her. "This house was meant for a family, not just one man." Stella's breath caught in her throat, and she turned to look at him. Cole was staring at her with an intensity that made her knees weak, and when he reached out to take her hand, she did not pull away. "Stella," he said, his voice low and rough, "I know we have not known each other long, and I know I am not the kind of man most women dream about. I am rough and I have a temper, and I spend most of my time alone with cows. But I cannot stop thinking about you. From the moment I opened that door and saw you standing there in the snow, half frozen and still so damn brave, I have not been able to get you out of my head." "Cole," Stella whispered, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I am falling in love with you," Cole said, the words coming out in a rush, as if he was afraid that if he did not say them now, he never would. "I know that is probably crazy. I know you might not feel the same way. But I had to tell you, because I cannot keep pretending that I just want to be your friend when what I really want is to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." Stella felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, and she stepped closer to him, reaching up to cup his face with her free hand. "You are not crazy," she said, her voice shaking, "because I am falling in love with you too." The smile that broke across Cole's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her so tightly that Stella could barely breathe. She did not care. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on, feeling safe and cherished and wanted in a way she had never experienced before. When Cole finally pulled back, it was only to lower his head and kiss her. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But when Stella pressed closer, rising up on her toes to deepen the kiss, Cole made a low sound in the back of his throat and gathered her even closer, his hands spanning her waist. The kiss was everything Stella had not known she wanted, fierce and tender all at once, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Marry me," Cole said, resting his forehead against hers. "I know it is too soon, and I know I should court you properly, but I do not want to wait. I have spent too many years alone, and I do not want to spend another day without knowing that you are mine." Stella laughed, a joyful sound that seemed to echo across the valley. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Goldfield, with Emma and Frank standing as witnesses. Stella wore a simple blue dress that Emma had helped her make, and Cole wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable but impossibly handsome. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad, and when Cole slipped a simple gold band onto Stella's finger, She felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The townspeople threw them a small celebration at the community hall, with music and dancing and more food than Stella had seen in years. Cole was not much of a dancer, but he held her close and swayed to the music, his arms wrapped around her waist, and Stella thought she had never been happier. That night, Cole brought her home to the ranch, carrying her over the threshold of the main house while she laughed and protested that she was perfectly capable of walking. He set her down gently in the middle of the front room, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other in the lamplight. "I cannot believe you are really mine," Cole said softly, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I am," Stella said, taking his hand and pressing a kiss to his palm. "For as long as you want me." "Forever then," Cole said, and then he was kissing her again, and Stella let herself get lost in the sensation, in the feeling of his hands on her body and his lips on her skin. He was gentle with her, patient and careful, and when they finally came together in the big bed upstairs, Stella felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Stella's life. She continued teaching at the school, riding into town 3 days a week while Cole worked the ranch. On the days she was home, she threw herself into making the house a home, planting a garden and sewing curtains and filling the rooms with warmth and life. Cole was not an overly demonstrative man, but he showed his love in 100 small ways, from the way he made sure there was always fresh coffee waiting for her in the morning to the way he held her close at night, his arms wrapped around her as if he was afraid she might disappear. They had their disagreements, of course. Cole could be stubborn and set in his ways, and Stella had a temper that could flare up when she felt like she was not being heard. But they learned to navigate those moments, to talk through their frustrations and find compromises that worked for both of them. And the making up, Stella discovered with a blush, was always worth the argument. By summer, Stella knew she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but it was not until Doc Harrison confirmed it that she allowed herself to believe it. She told Cole that night over dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment, Cole just stared at her, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Then he set it down carefully, pushed back his chair and crossed to her side of the table. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her so tightly that she could feel the tremor running through his body. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Stella said, laughing through the tears that were streaming down her face. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Cole pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Stella, I am more than happy. I am terrified and overwhelmed and more grateful than I know how to say." Their son was born the following February, on a cold night when the wind was howling outside and the snow was falling in thick flurries. Doc Harrison and Emma were both there, and Cole paced the floor downstairs, wearing a path in the floorboards with his nervous energy. When Emma finally came down to tell him that he had a son and that both mother and baby were healthy, Cole took the stairs 3 at a time. Stella was exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. But when Cole entered the room, her face lit up with a radiant smile. She was holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket, and when she looked down at the baby, there was such love in her eyes that Cole felt his throat tighten. "Come meet your son," Stella said softly. Cole approached slowly, almost reverently, and when Stella placed the baby in his arms, he felt something shift inside him. The infant was so small, so fragile, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful, and Cole felt a wave of love so intense that it nearly brought him to his knees. "He is perfect," Cole whispered. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking James," Stella said. "After my father, despite everything, he did love me in his own way." "James," Cole repeated, testing the name. "James Everett, I like it." Little James was a fussy baby, prone to colic and long crying jags that left both Stella and Cole exhausted. But he was also sweet and curious, and as the months passed, he grew into a bright, lively child who kept them both on their toes. Cole proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with his son, and Stella often found herself watching the two of them together, her heart full to bursting. When James was 2, Stella discovered she was pregnant again, and this time they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah. Sarah was the opposite of her brother in almost every way, quiet and content, with Stella's fair hair and Cole's gray eyes. James adored his little sister, and Cole often joked that the boy had appointed himself as Sarah's personal protector. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and lean times when money was tight. But through it all, Cole and Stella faced everything together, their love for each other and for their children giving them the strength to weather any storm. When James was 8 and Sarah was 6, a group of rustlers began operating in the area, stealing cattle and causing trouble for the local ranchers. Cole joined with several other men to form a vigilance committee, and they spent weeks tracking the thieves through the mountains. It was dangerous work, and Stella spent those weeks in a constant state of anxiety, terrified that something would happen to Cole. When he finally returned home, tired and dirty but unharmed, Stella threw herself into his arms and burst into tears. Cole held her close, murmuring soothing words into her hair, and promised her that he would never take such risks again unless it was absolutely necessary. "I cannot lose you," Stella said fiercely. "You and the children are everything to me. Promise me you will be careful." "I promise," Cole said solemnly. "I will always come back to you." The years passed and the children grew. James became a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning, much to Stella's delight. She taught him herself, since the schoolhouse in Goldfield was too far for him to attend regularly, and she discovered that he had a natural aptitude for mathematics and science. Sarah, meanwhile, was all wild energy and laughter, always trailing after her father and begging to help with the ranch work. Cole taught her to ride almost as soon as she could walk, and by the time she was 10, she could rope a calf as well as any of the ranch hands Cole occasionally hired during busy seasons. Stella continued to teach at the school in Goldfield, though as the children got older, she reduced her schedule to just 1 or 2 days a week. She loved her work, loved seeing the children learn and grow, but she also treasured the time she spent at home with her family. Cole had expanded the ranch over the years, buying up adjacent land and increasing the size of the herd, and they were comfortable now in a way Stella had never imagined possible when she was a girl struggling to make ends meet in Carson City. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised her by taking her into Reno for a weekend, leaving the children with Emma and Frank. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together since their honeymoon, and Stella felt like a giddy newlywed as they checked into a hotel and explored the city. That night, as they lay in bed in the unfamiliar room, Cole pulled her close and pressed a kiss to her temple. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying me, I mean, choosing this life." Stella turned to face him, her eyes searching his in the dim light. "Never," she said firmly. "Not once. You gave me everything I ever wanted, Cole, a home, a family, a love I never thought I would find." "How could I regret that? I just want to make sure you are happy," Cole said, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, "that you feel like you made the right choice." "I am happy," Stella said, turning her head to press a kiss to his palm. "Happier than I ever thought possible. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Cole Everett. Do not ever doubt that." Cole smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that still made Stella's heart skip a beat. And then he was kissing her, and they spent the rest of the night reminding each other exactly how much they meant to one another. The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. James left for college in San Francisco when he was 18, determined to study engineering, and Sarah, now a confident 16-year-old, took over more and more of the ranch responsibilities. Stella and Cole watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet sadness, knowing that soon they would be flying the nest entirely. It was around this time that Cole's health began to falter. At first, it was just small things. He tired more easily, and sometimes his hands shook in a way that concerned Stella. Doc Harrison, now an old man himself, examined Cole and delivered the news that his heart was weak, likely the result of years of hard labor and the stresses of ranch life. "You need to slow down," Doc Harrison said bluntly. "Let Sarah and the hired men take on more of the work. If you do not, you are not going to see 60. Cole was only 53, and the idea of slowing down, of not being able to work his own land, was almost unbearable to him. But Stella put her foot down, insisting that he follow the doctor's orders, and gradually, Cole began to delegate more of the daily operations to Sarah and the ranch hands. It was a difficult transition, but it also gave Cole and Stella more time together, and they spent those days much as they had in the early years of their marriage, talking and laughing, and simply enjoying each other's company. They took walks around the property, hand in hand, and Cole would point out all the changes he had made over the years, the fences he had mended and the buildings he had constructed. "I want you to know," Cole said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "that I would do it all again. Every moment, every hardship, every joy. I would choose you every single time." Stella felt tears prick her eyes and she squeezed his hand tightly. "I would choose you too," she said softly. "Always." James returned home that summer with a new bride, a pretty young woman named Clara who had grown up in San Francisco. She was nervous about ranch life, but Sarah took her under her wing, and before long, Clara was settling in nicely. James announced that he was going to start his own business in Goldfield, designing and building irrigation systems for the local farms and ranches, and Cole could not have been more proud. Sarah, meanwhile, had fallen in love with one of the ranch hands, a good man named Tom who had been working for them for 3 years. Cole gave them his blessing, and they were married in the spring, with a big celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from all over the county. Stella and Cole became grandparents twice over in quick succession, first when Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Emma, and then when Sarah had a son they called David. Watching Cole hold his grandchildren, seeing the softness in his eyes and the gentle way he cradled them, Stella fell in love with him all over again. Cole's health continued to decline slowly over the next few years, but he bore it with the same quiet stoicism he had shown throughout his life. He spent his days sitting on the porch, watching the ranch continue to thrive under Sarah and Tom's management, and playing with his grandchildren when they came to visit. Stella remained by his side through it all, just as she had promised on their wedding day. She read to him in the evenings, books of poetry and adventure stories, and they reminisced about their life together, about all the moments big and small that had shaped their journey. One night, as they lay in bed together, Cole turned to her with an expression of such profound contentment that it took Stella's breath away. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice weak but steady. "That day you came to my door begging for shelter from the snow was the best day of my life. You saved me, Stella. I was so lost before you came, so alone. You gave me a reason to live, a reason to hope. You gave me everything." Stella was crying now, unable to hold back the tears. "You gave me everything too," she whispered. "You showed me what love is supposed to be. You made me feel safe and cherished and valued. I love you so much, Cole, more than I could ever put into words." "I know," Cole said, reaching out to wipe away her tears with a trembling hand. "I have always known. And I love you too, Stella, with everything I am, with everything I have ever been. Forever." Cole lived for another 5 years, long enough to see Emma and David grow into bright, curious children, and long enough to welcome 2 more grandchildren into the family. He passed away peacefully in his sleep on a warm summer night, with Stella holding his hand and whispering words of love into his ear. The grief was overwhelming at first, a crushing weight that made it hard for Stella to breathe. But she found comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the ranch that Cole had built with his own 2 hands, and in the memories of the life they had shared together. She knew that Cole would want her to keep living, to keep finding joy in the world, and so she did. Stella lived for another 12 years after Cole's death, watching her grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. She continued to teach, taking on private students in Goldfield, and she wrote letters to James and Clara, who had moved to San Francisco for James's work. Sarah and Tom remained on the ranch, and Stella spent her days surrounded by family, grateful for every moment. When Stella finally passed away at the age of 82, it was in the same bed where she had slept beside Cole for so many years. Sarah was holding her hand, and the last thing Stella said was Cole's name, spoken with such love and longing that everyone in the room felt their hearts break a little. They buried her next to Cole on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a large cottonwood tree that they had planted together in the early years of their marriage. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single inscription that Sarah had chosen: "Together, always." And in the years that followed, the ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, a testament to the love and hard work of the cowboy who had opened his door to a woman begging for shelter from the snow, and who had never let her leave. Their story became legend in Goldfield, told and retold by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a single act of kindness, and that true love, once found, lasts forever. The ranch house still stands today, carefully preserved by the Everett family, and if you visit on a quiet evening when the sun is setting over the Nevada mountains, you can almost feel the presence of Stella and Cole, their love woven into the very fabric of the land they called home. The porch where they sat together for so many years, the bedroom where they held each other through countless nights, the kitchen where Stella made coffee and Cole told stories to their children. All of it remains as a monument to a love that was forged in the harshest of circumstances and grew stronger with every passing year. Emma, their granddaughter, became a teacher just like Stella, and she often told her students about her grandmother, about the woman who had braved a blizzard and found not just shelter, but a love that would define her entire life. David followed in his grandfather's footsteps, taking over the management of the ranch and expanding it even further, always making decisions with the question, what would Grandpa Cole do? In the back of his mind. The story of how Stella and Cole met became a cherished family tale, told at every gathering and celebration. The younger generations would sit wide-eyed as the older ones described the terrible blizzard of 1887, the frozen woman at the door, and the cowboy who did not hesitate to save her. They spoke of the love that grew between them, fast and fierce and unshakable, and of the life they built together against all odds. In Goldfield, the schoolhouse where Stella taught for so many years was eventually turned into a museum, and among the exhibits was a small section dedicated to her memory. There were photographs of her with her students, samples of her lesson plans written in her neat, careful handwriting, and a journal she had kept during her first year in Goldfield. In one entry, dated just a few weeks after she arrived in town, she had written about Cole, about the man who had saved her life and who was slowly, inexorably, capturing her heart. "I find myself thinking of him at the strangest times," the entry read. "When I am teaching the children their letters, when I am walking home in the evening, when I am lying in bed at night. I barely know him, and yet I feel as though I have known him my entire life. Is this what love feels like? This sense of rightness, of belonging? I am afraid to hope, afraid that I am imagining things. But when I am with him, I feel more myself than I ever have before. I feel like I am exactly where I am meant to be." The journal entry never failed to move those who read it, a glimpse into the heart of a woman falling in love, a reminder that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Old West, tenderness and hope could flourish. The Cole and Stella Everett Memorial Scholarship was established by James and Sarah in honor of their parents, providing financial assistance to young people in the Goldfield area who wanted to pursue higher education. Over the years, dozens of students benefited from the scholarship, and many of them went on to do great things, always carrying with them the story of the couple whose love and generosity had made their dreams possible. On the 100th anniversary of Stella and Cole's wedding, the family organized a massive reunion at the ranch. Descendants came from all over the country, some of whom had never even seen the property where their ancestors had lived and loved. They toured the house, walked the land, and gathered on the hill beneath the cottonwood tree where Stella and Cole were buried. Sarah's great-grandson, a boy of 10 named Cole, laid flowers on the graves and asked his mother to tell him the story again. She did, her voice soft and reverent, and as she spoke, the family stood together in silence, honoring the memory of two people who had shown them what it meant to love completely and without reservation. As the sun set over the Nevada mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, the family linked hands and sang a hymn that Stella had loved, their voices rising up into the twilight. And in that moment, it felt as though Stella and Cole were there with them, their spirits woven into the fabric of the land and the lives of everyone they had touched. The ranch continued to prosper, generation after generation, each one adding their own chapter to the story while never forgetting the foundation that Stella and Cole had laid. The values they had lived by, hard work and integrity and love above all else, became the guiding principles of the family, passed down as surely as the land itself. And so the legacy of that snowy night in 1887, when a desperate woman begged for shelter and a lonely cowboy opened his door, lived on. It lived on in the faces of their descendants, in the land they had shaped with their own hands, in the stories told around dinner tables and campfires. It lived on as a reminder that sometimes the most profound moments in life come when we least expect them, and that true love, once found, never truly dies. It simply transforms, becoming part of something larger, something that endures long after we are gone. The story of Stella and Cole Everett was, in the end, a story about hope. Hope that even in the darkest moments, when the storm is raging and the cold is biting, there is shelter to be found. Hope that even the loneliest among us can find connection and love. Hope that a single act of kindness can change the course of a life. and that the choices we make in moments of crisis can echo through the generations. And perhaps most importantly, it was a story about the enduring power of love, about how two people from vastly different circumstances could come together and build something beautiful and lasting. It was a reminder that love does not require perfect circumstances or ideal timing. It simply requires two hearts willing to open themselves to the possibility, willing to take the risk, willing to hold on through whatever challenges may come. As the years turned into decades and the decades into a century, the Everett Ranch remained a symbol of that love, a physical manifestation of what Stella and Cole had created together. Visitors to Goldfield often made the pilgrimage out to see it, drawn by the story and by the sense that something special had happened in that place, something worth remembering and celebrating. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled around the corners of the old ranch house, it was easy to imagine a young woman stumbling through the storm, desperate and afraid, and a man opening his door without hesitation, pulling her into the warmth and safety. It was easy to imagine the moment their eyes met, the spark of recognition that passed between them, the sense that something fundamental had shifted in both their lives. The cowboy had opened his door and never let her leave, not because he held her captive, but because she never wanted to go. She had found in him a home, a partner, a love that filled all the empty places in her heart. And he had found in her a reason to live fully, to open himself to joy and possibility, to believe that the future could be bright. Together, they had built a life that was rich and full, marked by both hardship and happiness, struggle and triumph. They had raised children who carried their values forward, who understood that family was everything and that love was worth fighting for. They had created a legacy that stretched far beyond their own lifetimes, touching countless lives and inspiring generations. And in the end, is that not what we all hope for? To love and be loved, to build something that lasts, to know that our time on this earth mattered. Stella and Cole Everett achieved all of that and more, and their story serves as a beacon for anyone who has ever doubted the power of love, anyone who has ever wondered if one person can truly make a difference in another's life. The answer, as Stella and Cole proved beyond any doubt, is yes. One person can make all the difference. One act of kindness can change everything. One moment of courage, of opening yourself to another, can set in motion events that ripple outward through time, creating beauty and meaning and love that endures forever. And so the story ends where it began, with a woman at a door and a man who chose to open it. Two lives intersecting in a moment of crisis and becoming forever intertwined. It is a simple story, really, but then the best stories often are. A story of shelter and snow, of loneliness and connection, of two hearts finding each other against all odds and choosing, every single day, to stay together. That is the legacy of Stella and Cole Everett. Not just the ranch or the family or the material things they left behind, but the proof, etched into the very fabric of time, that love conquers all, that kindness matters, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a knock on a door and the willingness to answer it. Their love story, born in the harsh winter of the Nevada wilderness, bloomed into something extraordinary, something worth remembering, something worth celebrating for all time.